Good morning, good day, good night, wherever you are on the planet watching this. This is John Dupuy, and this is our ongoing Spiritual Technologies 2.0 Summit. And we have an awesome guest with us today. And also I want to introduce Doug Prater. He is the communications officer at iAwake now, and we've been working together on the Integral Recovery podcast. It's just been fantastic. So we just invited him to come over and help us with a bunch of other things. So welcome to this, Doug. Great to have you.
Thank you, John. I'm thrilled to be here.
And our guest is Mina Lee, and we have talked before, and she's a very interesting person, very well placed, kind of in kind of the cutting edge of the whole transformational neurohacking world. And if I'm understanding, you're also working with Mikey Siegel as his partner and doing this thing. So welcome, Mina. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background for the people who don't know you?
Professionally, I started my career out at the Boston Consulting Group in Southeast Asia. Really wanted to go out there and do economic development and work with the governments and the companies there. Spent some time in the World Bank designing funding platforms for entrepreneurs, and then ended most recently, I guess, with Xiaomi, which is the world's largest private tech firm at the time, and they're like the Apple of China. And what's interesting about them is they grew to a $45 billion firm at the time with $0 in marketing spend. So we could also talk about viral marketing and how to grow communities in order to grow a company. And it's interesting because I feel like what's happening on the consciousness level of the world right now is this huge rise of communities and community leaders. And so I feel like it's hugely relevant today, and communities as the vehicle for our world as we transform, as our old systems become hospiced, and as we need to hospice the old systems and midwife in the new systems. And it's going to be done by these community leaders.
I absolutely love that. Yeah, and Mina, could you move your camera up just a little? There you go. And well, that is absolutely fascinating. And, Pam and I are going to be coming to Palo Alto in, in about 2 weeks. And we're going to be having a meeting at Sophia University. And we'd love for you to be there because we're bringing Veit Landau from the Human Trust in Germany, who's created this community thing that is expanding and just being very successful in German-speaking world. We want to do the same thing. So if you could be there, it would be just wonderful to have your wisdom and perspective on this.
Yeah, that would be great. We also created so I was living in Singapore, and we created a spiritual community there in a city that was so finance and consulting based. We started out with 4 and then grew to 200 by the time I left. And the people have gone on to start studios that welcome teachers in from different places. When we built a spiritual community in Singapore, we also realized that to build really deep communities, communities depended on really deep one-on-one bonds. So the more time that we spent building the one-on-one bonds before a group experience, the stronger the community was. And that's when we saw a sustained personal transformation. We saw people living more aligned lives, leaving their banking jobs, but it wasn't like jumping into the unknown and not working. They started new ventures that are very successful, but they're way happier. And it basically grew to now we have more than 300 people, I think. And there's different nodes in Austria, London, New York, and San Francisco. And the nodes are people who hold a community together, and they have land. So they're typically retreat centered community leaders. And so really now we're looking at a question of how do we empower communities to be self-sustaining and self-organizing? How do we give them the tools to organize and to meet each other in a really deep and meaningful way, to be these communities of what Mikey and I call practice and purpose, where you're connecting first from the heart and then you're creating stuff for the outside world. And it's perfect because that's also where Mikey and I are with now with consciousness hacking, is we have 10,000 members and 20 chapters, and we have the same question of what next? How do we supercharge all these entrepreneurs around the world and give them the tools to self-organize, self-sustain, and then how do we surface the entrepreneurs that are doing really well, and how do we create a web portal or some kind of media portal for them to really get the attention that they need, and then also the financial capital, the investors that they need, which is something else that we look at.
Yeah, I mean, That is so beautiful and so wise. I just want to weep or just, get up and cheer, because that really seems to be something that is emerging. The BIPE and the Human Trust guys in Germany have done just that. It's almost like you guys are, when you start to see these really hip, awake people all over the world doing essentially the same thing independently, you're tapping into some kind of level of the collective unconscious, as you would say, that's really wanting to emerge. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. And our friend and colleague Todd Jason is doing the Amplifield, and he's also moving toward the same thing. And the internet itself, as great as it is, can be a very dissociated, lonely place with tons of information and lots of talking heads. And it really doesn't meet some of the deeper needs of the human heart. So what you're speaking about it's just so timely and so brilliant. I really love it.
Yeah, and your colleague asked what consciousness hacking was. So consciousness hacking was started 3 years ago around a question, which was, can technology actually be used and innovation be actually used to point directly at increasing consciousness? So not maybe someday as a side effect, but can we use it to directly innovate on consciousness, and can we meet people where they're at? And then that question tapped into the zeitgeist of something that's going on right now. That's because right. When Mikey started it, it was a single chapter here. And then when the 20 chapters around the world started, we have 400 people in Austria. None of it was push. It was all pull. They would message in and say, I want to start a chapter in my city. Can you give me resources? And it's been this organic growth now of more than 10,000 people in different meetups. And so I think, and what the mission statement of consciousness hacking, is to support the ecosystem of conscious entrepreneurs and investors, what we call conscious innovators, creating transformative technologies. Transformative technologies being technologies that directly increase consciousness or increase your emotional, psychological, physical well-being.
Yeah, and spiritual well-being, which is a part of that too. But yeah, well said. It's a great definition.
Completely.
Have you found any tools that you're particularly excited about towards that end, increasing consciousness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are low-hanging fruits today, and then there are some tools that we had not even imagined. And the industry is still young, and I think in the next few years, it's going to grow so quickly. I feel like a few tools today that are very low-hanging fruits. One, I'm invested in a few, but a few that I'm excited about are one that's called Leaf Therapeutics, which is a heart rate variability device, which connects you and your therapist. But more so for readers who don't know, heart rate variability, when you have high heart rate variability, you're in you're in your most optimal state in terms of like working, thinking, rationality, presence. And so it's something that you don't even need a computer screen on. It vibrates to tell me on my body when my heart rate variability is going up, which I like. But I think two low-hanging fruits that I'm really excited about in today's society is, one is the matching problem, is helping people find the modality, the spiritual modality that most fits them where they are in their journey, and having some kind of web platform that actually contextualizes and maps all the different tools and modalities out there. I remember when I started my spiritual journey and I was so confused with like, oh, there's energy healing and there's Reiki and there's all these. What I realized is that they were all connected. But if someone could have drawn me a contextual map back then of all my options and what I could have chosen depending on where I was in my life, that would have made it so much easier. And we see a couple companies doing that. But there's a lot of space for innovation there. And I think the other low-hanging fruit is just us taking existing content that really works and putting it on technology platforms. For example, I have an entrepreneur that I'm working with in China that's doing conscious parenting. So she's taking all the child psychology development content in the US and then gamifying it to teach all the parents in China beyond math and science. Like, what does it mean to have humility, resilience, character development, basically in China? And you can imagine in Asia, people have focused on the brain and the left side of humanity for so long. Or even like an app that would teach nonviolent communication, right? Like an AI that would rehearse with you, like different screenplays of nonviolent communication. And that is so practical. Like I can see market sizes for it in corporate, teaching salespeople how to deal with angry clients, which is so common. For kids, teaching kids how to deal with bullies. I sense that you're feeling anger because you have a need for whatever, think about and then think about how that would influence their own nonviolent communication within themselves. right? So there's tons of low-hanging fruit that we can do where there's an existing market for. And I know there's all this neurofeedback and biofeedback technology, and that needs to continue to develop. But I think there's also a lot of stuff where we could reach millions of people today just by packaging it right and marketing it right and through proper distribution.
Yeah, you're talking about kids. Well, what about, soldiers and policemen and people that, live in that high stressful level where really, kind of scary, dangerous things come up, sometimes on a daily basis, and to train them to be very present and be able to act optimally instead of, resolving problems instead of creating larger ones.
Yeah.
Huge potential there.
Yeah, I've been interviewing different investors, different philanthropists who have been giving to the consciousness space. And it's interesting what's been rising is like top interests. So like, for example, education is almost near the top, which is really how do we bring more mindfulness within schools, within everything from K to 12, training and this whole notion that like high schoolers have to know what they want for the rest of their lives by the end of high school without any kind of self-reflection or emotional support is ridiculous, right? But education is really on the top. I've also seen an explosion of people who are opening up retreat centers around the world. Like just every other person I meet, I feel like is buying land and opening up retreat centers, and they want to provide places of healing. And I feel like our physical world is shifting, to mirror that, right now, like a lot of more conscious co-working spaces, co-living spaces, retreat centers. What else was on the top of the interest list? Let me think. Education. Oh, basic science and research was underneath education. A lot of people want to fund, a lot of the philanthropists want to fund.
Brilliant, gosh.
Actual science and research behind consciousness so the rest of the industry can actually take off. Psychedelics is also very big, but that's under the medical, the psychotherapy and psychedelics. Rolling Stone just came out with an article on it in March. It really seems like it's hitting the mainstream consciousness.
Yeah, and that book, Stealing Fire, is like really taking off. And of course, Mikey's in there and, talking about the main idea. How do we get into these, flow states where you are just in this zone of super achievement, super clarity, super effortless presence. And exciting stuff.
And you actually would be excited because the top two categories were education and then technology as a tool. So a lot of them were very interested in the ability of technology to scale and to reach people that hadn't been touched before or in a new way.
Yeah, we're working with Jack Chin now to create tools for kids with ADHD in China. So how freaking cool is that? So
I'm heading to China this Thursday to actually. One of my friends is opening up. He wants to be the Esalen of China. It's called Octave Group, and so I'm leading the experiential workshops there for the attendees. But that'll be interesting. And China is hosting the Science of Consciousness conference this June as well. There's tons. There's a group there called Crystal Globe, and they were just telling me last night that they want to start a fund, a $3 billion R&B fund, which is around 300 million USD, for companies to go open up in China that are increasing, neuroscience, wellness, well-being, what we call transformative technologies.
When I first got into this thing, one of the books that really influenced me was Michael Hutchinson's Mega Brain. I think it was written in 1990, and he was scanning all the stuff that was going on, and he thought it was going to happen that year. He just thought you're going to have consciousness bars all over the world and this stuff, and it just didn't happen in 1990. Of course, you didn't have the internet either, but it seemed like now, and Michael Hutchinson passed away. May he rest in peace, a few years ago. But I think now the thing he was predicting with what's going to happen seems to be happening right now. Very cool, exciting time to be into this stuff.
Yeah. And I love what you're doing with media, because I feel like what we really need to do to have this movement gain momentum is more of a common voice and a united voice for this movement, and to connect the tribe leaders together. So when I during the interviews, when I asked like what two of the biggest challenges were for people as they try to contribute dollars towards the space, was one, this notion around PR, a voice, communications, a single storyline for the space, and a strengthened voice for the space, which includes everything from like media, storytelling, features, case studies, but in a more concentrated and widespread space. And the second problem they noted was finding good people. Like a lot of the people who are starting projects were scientists or therapists, but not a lot of people with business background that has sustainability in mind. And so I think what's really interesting with consciousness hacking is that I feel there's an opportunity, and I see all these executives come in, but they don't really know where to plug in to themselves. You know, they're also in a place of transition. You know, and it's interesting because the three qualities of consciousness hackers is they're somehow related to technology, they have a spiritual practice, and they're in transition. I didn't even until the last few weeks pay deep attention to this one, which is that everyone is looking for greater congruence. And so you have all these business people coming, but there's not a place for them to stick or match with an entrepreneur. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to actually next level up is to actually be matching different skill sets so people can create more holistic and sustainable teams with the engineers, with the business people, with the PR and the comms, so that people can actually create companies that will really take off.
Yeah, with the Transformational Technology Conference that we went to last year and is coming up in October in Palo Alto again at Sophia University, you guys are really pushing toward that. And it's really been an extraordinary experience going there, you know, because we were pretty much in our little iAwake silo. You know, we had things going on, but the conference really blew open the world for us in a really positive way. And of course, these interviews have been extraordinary. These brilliant people, and when we start doing it, we just get into these flow places, which kind of is a hint that maybe the universe really does want to do something, because this brilliant vision just keeps emerging, you know, with person after person. And we did a panel the other day with some of the usual suspects, and it just became this luminescent Communitas experience that we're talking about. Blew us all away. It was very powerful. So it just keeps happening over and over. And, you know, part is the hard science, but then the soft science is getting the phenomenological reports from people that all over the world that are using these transformational technologies and saying, this is what the brain doing, this is how we get there, but this is the experience, and this is how we use it to practice on a daily basis. And you start putting that together, man, you've really got something to talk about.
You guys should submit an article for Conscious Magazine with your key takeaways from all your interviews. Or like create a trailer, like a 3-minute, 5-minute trailer, where it's just clips of like the highlights, like the gems of the interviews, to really get virality. So people don't have to watch the whole thing, but they'll see those 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and maybe they'll watch the rest. And
are you talking about video, like short video things, or something we actually write up?
I think both.
Okay.
I do both, but I think
you just provided us with I put together what you said in the last 20 minutes in like 6 or 7 minutes. Bam! It's going to be great. You've just done some brilliant stuff for me now. So, Doug, you have any questions or anything you'd like to?
I am particularly interested in your emphasis on community building, and wondered what advice you would give to people who may be watching this that would like to start communities of their own or are interested in growing communities.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Seth Godin put it interestingly in his book Tribes, right? Which is, in order to build strong communities, you need strong relationships with each other, strong relationships with the leader, and a strong call to action. Now, the only tweak I would make on that is the leader maybe in the beginning, but actually what people need a strong relationship with is the principles of a community, right? And it's the same thing that I see in a company. Like whenever there's key leader risk, the company doesn't move as smoothly, right? So how does each community, I would say, start off with what are the core values and then what are the core principles, even more important than values? And the difference between values and principles are that principles are actionable, right? So principles are really like the behaviors and the ways to engage and the ways that you act and the ways that you don't act. So for example, within my community, one of our core principles is connection first. So before we start talking about business, before we start talking about business plans, we start from a place of connection first. And if we lose connection, we stop talking to get back into connection before we do, right? So really, what are the principles within your community that actually help govern it, right? So when you have difficult decisions and when you have conflicts, what you fall back on is the principles to help resolve it, rather than looking to a leader for all the answers, right? And that's what allows for fluidity and growth. So I'd say for the communities around the world, like, what are your principles? And then what is the call to action? Like, what is the purpose, like for this community, right? Where are they going towards? What is the bigger thing they're moving towards? Because the belief underneath that is that we can achieve more together than separately, right? And I would right now what we're doing is we're putting together a playbook actually of resources for communities on how to gather. So how to be in a community of practice and purpose. How do you first go from a place of heart, spirit, body, mind connection. And then from there, start creating, planning, you know, being the left brain. And so with that, we'd love to, I mean, for communities that are interested, we'd love to share that. We want to make it open source. But we have so many exercises that we're assembling on how to connect. And we have tons of exercises that we're assembling on how to co-discover purpose. And there's an amazing group. There's so many exercises that are now focused on collective wisdom and unlocking collective wisdom. There's a whole group called Dragon Dreaming, which is based on the indigenous practices of Australia. And they have this notion that in today's society, we're making decisions in a room within a power dynamic of one person which is leading towards an outcome. They're like saying, this is what we need to do, this is where we need to go. And then people who are resisting that. But in that world, time is linear. Like we're always going somewhere. Right. So because time is linear, there's always one person that's leading and then someone that's retracting and everyone in between. But if time was circular, which is how the indigenous people think, because the dream world to them was more real than the current world. Right.
Sure.
And the dream world, you're everything. There's no object creating an action on a subject. It's not me, Mina, lifting a cup. Mina is the cup, the environment, the person. She's everything in the dream world, right? And time is circular. So they're bringing that concept. And in indigenous culture, everyone is welcome at the table to share their dreams because their dreams are that powerful. So how do we take this notion of circularity of time? And these civilizations have been around a lot longer than the modern one that we're operating in, right? So how do we really go back to sustainability and connection, right? And so it's very interesting how they get a group together and how the practices unlock everyone's voice, you know, and it's been proven that the more that of equal speaking time there is within a group, the more innovation, the more dialogue, the more group wisdom is unlocked, right? And there's like, even imagine a simple technology app. A friend of mine was suggesting this the other day, where all it does is it measures and it provides a report at the end of a meeting for what the percentage was that different people spoke, so people can just be aware. And just from the sound bites, right? It'd be like, Jason spoke for 80% of the time. Be aware of that, you know, because maybe someone else and so there's just so many ways for us to build deeper communities and for technology to play a role in that.
Yeah, and you know, it's really because one of the kind of the dark alleys this whole technological transformative revolution could go, it'd just be a bunch of geeks playing around with technology and forgetting about the human aspect of it and working together and opening the heart and using this
I mean, that's what I've noticed in
wisdom, and compassion.
That's what I've noticed in the Silicon Valley, though. A lot of people are designing for themselves, right? It's like they went through something, they're solving problems for themselves, but they're not connected sometimes to the larger world and to the systems that we're in. So also like the product market fit, what does it mean? Who are you actually serving? What is the profile? What is the distribution channels? Like a lot of the entrepreneurs here that I see are starting are missing this like larger linkage and practical linkage into markets and into a way to distribute and grow their products. And I think that's where we need to provide support and linkages within this ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think if this technology is used skillfully, then it really enhances people's ability to grow into deeper stages of compassion and connection. They may start out for one reason, because I want to be really successful and blah, blah, blah. And then it starts as a person continues to grow, the motivation for doing it deepens and becomes more pure. And
that's another reason why communities are so important, is because it holds you accountable to your personal development journey. And so if you're really close with the community and you've told them, this is the person that I want to be, or they see you even more so than you do for the person that you can be. So when you start running the company or you start growing something and you start going with today's systems, or you start shifting your way of being, you need that community to call you out and to hold you accountable. So community for us is the root of social change, and for us the root of continued sustained transformation. And so entrepreneurs need these, investors, anyone needs these communities for, like you said, sustaining a transformation. Right? I've seen a lot of companies actually within the consciousness space start with a founder that did have an experience, and then once they started fundraising from existing, normal venture capital holders, or from they go back to old ways. They abandon their journey. They stop seeking, right? And then whatever it is that they're dealing with is reflected in their products, because there's this base belief that you are what you create and you create what you are, right? So if you're feeling anxious, not good enough, competitive, all that gets built into the product, right? So how do we balance, and the competition is not bad, right? But how do we balance how the way that we do win-wins in today's systems and markets with leaving the consumer actually feeling more connected? And that's what the question comes down to for us in consciousness hacking. Does the person who's using it actually feel more connected at the end of it? You know, do they feel more joyful? Do they feel more happy? What is their feeling state? You know, do they feel more connected to them? I love my schema. I love the 3 levels of connection, right? Do they feel more connected to themselves? Do they feel more connected to others? Or do they feel more connected to nature and the systems, you know, the larger system that we're operating in?
Yeah. And what I'm hearing is that for those of us who are in the business of creating these transformative technologies, that there is more responsibility than just creating them. We have to make sure that they're used wisely and that we're providing a helpful, supportive, loving context where people can grow in. And sometimes in the transformative journey, it can be very painful and very scary, you know, and all of a sudden you kick to a new level. And if you're all by yourself, you know, I mean, you can go and try to Google dark nights of the soul or this or that or whatever that means. But if you have a community of people that are actually doing the practice and working on an ongoing basis, then it can, you know, you can be held, and it can make the journey much safer and much more effective ultimately.
Totally. And I think Joe Greenstein is trying to do stuff like that as well with Inner Space, you know, bring entrepreneurs together and letting them connect and teaching them skills like having difficult conversations, which I think is great. These are all things that during our event gatherings, we like to support our entrepreneurs in doing, you know, connecting with each other, learning skills, and then in supporting each other in their ventures. But you're exactly right.
Oh, it's certainly been rich. You know, I'm looking forward to going back to the Trans Tech thing to be with my family, with my peeps. You know?
Yeah.
It's like because we'd interviewed a bunch of people before I went there. I recognized a bunch of people, and we connected, and they were able to connect in person, and then we've continued the conversation. But
for communities to grow and to be powerful, you need sub communities within the larger community.
Yeah.
So you need people that are really at the same either spiritual journey you are, or whatever it is that you're needing. And what we've realized is that for consciousness hacking, 10,000 people, but within it, what we've realized is the emergence of smaller communities. So what we need to do is actually help the entrepreneurs gather, the investors gather, the philanthropists gather. There's a whole group that's interested in using media for consciousness. So creating studios and storytelling and technologies that specifically is used to directly increase people's consciousness as they watch it or consume it or interact with the storyline. And so for all these people, I would say it's like being in a community, finding your sub-segment. And it's when all the sub-segments are connected that the community grows really strong. And for the entrepreneur, I would say it's not just you being in a community, but in order to grow your product, it's how do you also help your consumers be in community, right? And that's what Xiaomi did, the tech company that I was at. Them growing to $45 billion without spending money on marketing, was it grew an entire social structure and community structure. And it's the same thing as a Harley Davidson model, what Xiaomi did, right? When you bought a bike, when you paid $7,000 to get a bike, you weren't buying a bike, you were buying a family, you're buying a community. Right? It's the same thing that Xiaomi did. You know, when you bought the phone, you weren't just buying a phone, you're buying into a community. And they unlocked it by having originally online forums. And so people that were originally isolated, computer scientists, nerds, people who love computers across China, suddenly had a forum to talk to other people. And then they would gather in each of their cities to go and do community service together, to go and do photography trips together, to go and do whatever together. And so all Xiaomi did is provide a platform for people to gather. And then they created a social structure where there were ambassadors in each city or in each university. And it was an honor to be considered an ambassador, because what you did was you got quota, because the phones were all sold out. So you got quota that you could give out to yourself or to your family, to your friends, of actually getting these things that were sold out. And then it didn't cost Xiaomi anything to do that. You know, so there's tons of very innovative ways to support and build community within your users. And then there's tons of technology that's rising to help do that. And I think the one thing that no one has actually fully cracked is how to, in the US at least I feel, is how to facilitate these deep communications and dialogue of community as they grow and as a movement grows. So how do you do that across multiple communities? right? And there's stuff like Meetup and stuff, but no one I feel has fully cracked this thing of enabling communication across numerous communities.
Well, in my work, I talk about integral practice, and I've kind of boiled it down to is you need a rigorous physical practice. In other words, you got to keep your body strong and vital and healthy and all that. And you have to have a rigorous inner practice. So you put your inner and outer together, then you have a really actualized human being. But what I'm hearing here, kind of a parallel to that, is that we need to do kind of the online stuff, but we need to really focus on the offline too. One has to support the other, and I think it's really happening, but it's really brilliant what you're saying.
I have a point of view on where online supports versus offline as well. So I feel like in the stages of community building, there's stuff like discovery, finding a community, sustaining it, staying in touch, building it, and then sharing it or pulling in more people, right? I feel like discovering community is good using online technology tools, but also serendipitously, like for consciousness hacking, people just come to an event, but some other times people are searching, looking online. So it's really good for the search and discovery phase. The actual connection in person, wow, critical. The feeling, the body language, the voice. But I think there's also, and this is what Mikey and I have been talking about, a unique opportunity for technology to maintain conversations. So what we've been thinking about is when people gather, there's some kind of tool which helps people capture what's happening and help thread their conversation. So for example, a group meets on AI and they think that they're talking in a vacuum, but the tool shows them, here's the 30 other conversations or the thread of AI that's been happening before. So people are able to plug into something that's happening. They can continue to contribute to it. And so the conversation stream becomes live and becomes coherent, right? And then, of course, after you do the connecting, staying in touch, technology has been huge there with community. But even there, I said there's a problem that hasn't been solved for large communities. Lots of different communities within a larger community, there hasn't been a solution for that. But small communities,
and excuse me, could you, Mina, state the problem again you find in the larger communities? What is exactly the problem you're finding?
The problem for large communities is an actual communication tool for larger communities to stay in touch with each other in a meaningful way. And within a larger community, you may have groups of 10, 12, and that's easy. They can use WhatsApp, they can use whatever. But across a large community where there's hundreds of smaller communities within it, how do you help that stay in touch, And there's all kinds of ideas like forums with hashtags, but I think no one has really cracked that in a way that's deep and meaningful.
Did you have any ideas what that might look like, the solution to that yet?
We've been brainstorming around with a few, but nothing's emerged out of the cooker yet as like this is the way, but there's a sense of this like online offline mix, and a sense of maybe it has to be something around allowing people to discover and find other people that share interests as well. So we're saying like within consciousness hacking, there are people with shared interest in AI, shared interest in sleep, shared interest in education, and maybe it's hashtags, maybe it's something else. But that's something that we're studying, and we're looking at different communities and how they're doing it.
Yeah, and you have to also look at the pathological slide. When I was young, a teenager, I was in a cult, okay, and that's an unhealthy community. And one of the characteristics, of course, to have a cult, you have to have a cult leader. And there's no honorable way to leave. There's all this pressure, to give yourself away, whether it's Scientology or whatever. And we kind of went through that in the last 30 years in the United States. A lot of us in the consciousness movement now experience a guru or a cult or something that got unhealthy. So we need to really make sure that we have healthy, mature leaders that have done enough work on themselves, spiritually, psychologically, their shadow stuff, etc. So they're not into that. And like I said, one of the first rules of the cult is that there's no honorable way to leave. It's like I could go to a local church that's very strong here. I don't want to name names, and go, look, man, I've been with you guys 30 years. I really love you so much. It's been a wonderful experience, but I'm going to go study Buddhism now. People wouldn't go, good way to go, brother. We love you. Who'd be like, oh, you're backsliding. It's like, you can't leave. God, you're going to burn in hell and all this stuff. So, and there's other more sophisticated psychological arguments. So I need to make sure that kind of stuff doesn't happen, and I think this is kind of rotating leadership. I mean, like, when you're talking right now, you're really you're in a flow state. You're just laying this out. It's really brilliant, Mina. But then somebody else will be,
Exactly.
So that has to be honored.
Exactly. So that goes back again to a lot of indigenous cultures. And I love what Ohio Foundation is doing. They're actually teaching circling and providing tons of resources on this. But I agree with you that leadership, like what does it mean? So in the future, you do need leadership, no matter what, for decisions and for vectors. But how do you allow for rotational leadership? So shared leadership, co-leadership, servant leadership. There's all these principles that are emerging, right? Where the leader is really about
beautiful.
Serving. And I mean, I remember when I was at Xiaomi, half the time I was just a therapist for people, and I was just trying to figure out what they needed, how I could get out of the way to just allow them to be their best, right? And I think, again, the third piece what I was saying is the principles. Like have a very clearly defined set of principles that people fall back on the principles. Same thing in the US, we fall back on the Constitution, right? Because someone wrote a really great set of rights and principles for us to then fall back on. So again, I think for a lot of leaders, it's like being so clear as to what the principles are and maybe even co-crafting that with your community, I think is so important. And I see this, it's the same thing for companies. Like I see tons of leaders walking around without actually a clear set of principles or values, and then there's just, there's a lot of work that can be done there. And I see there's such practical ways to anchor it. So when you create principles, you can anchor that in the way that you hire, in the way that you interview, in the way that you evaluate performance. Like it's not woo-woo. There's so many ways to anchor these things tangibly in the structures and companies that you're building.
Have you found any particular examples of principles that help in bringing people together and promoting the kind of shared conscious evolution that we're discussing here?
That's a great question. So the first one we have is connection first. And I think people have to pick and choose their principles that resonate with them. So we have the principles that we have are connection first, lean in towards the edge or embrace the edge. So if something feels uncomfortable to you, recognize it and lean in towards it. But that's because our context is one of growth. So every community, every romantic relationship, everything has to, what a leader does is they provide context, or the relationship, everything there needs to be context, which is really, why are we here? Why are we gathering? Why are we in relationship with each other, right? And within all my communities, the context is one of evolution, is one of growth, and also one of contribution and service. And so because of that, our principles are, stay in connection, lean into the edge or embrace the edge, stay in relationship, which basically that last one means if something is uncomfortable or you're not feeling good about it, you don't withdraw and you don't go into silence. So if you're not feeling comfortable, it's better to send a text back or call back saying, what you just said triggered me. I need some time for myself, and I will reach back out to you rather than being in silence. So this notion is around staying in relationship. So those are some of the core principles.
Yeah, and maybe it was contained in what you said, but also you're talking about it, but is making sure there's a constant awareness or remembrance why we're doing this stuff. What is the higher purpose of this? And I've been preaching that with integral practice for years. You just don't go to the gym because you want to be sexy and everything, which is fine. You want to be sexy, great, I love it. But that's not. There's a lot deeper reason for doing the work on yourself and developing the best version of yourself, because that's your gift that you can give back to the world.
Totally. And I've noticed that an interesting hack for that is it just when you talk to yourself, your dialogue for yourself, instead of saying I want or I desire, which is totally great, there can be some, you can even say it as what wants to be created or what wants to be emerged, right? Because then your brain suddenly is aware of like your connection to everything and
That's
what wants
powerful,
to come through.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I love it's our inner dialogue, and just changing the way that we frame it so that we can remember to stay connected.
Terrific. Well, we have a few more minutes. Anything, we've been asking the question, anything you would like to talk about and put out there to the spiritual technology community that's been coalescing around these broadcasts or interviews?
I just want to thank them for the work that they're doing. And I think it's so important to be in community, to find people who can support you. And Consciousness Hacking is here to support them. They can reach out to us. We're going to start creating smaller groups within our larger community, and actually doing more curation. So if people are looking for support, and we're actually going to start doing more connecting of entrepreneurs and investors and entrepreneurs and media attention to really help this ecosystem grow. And I would just say, yeah, be connected, be in the heart, and let's create from there. And I don't think that there's any wrong or right. You know, we're just going to be in this journey together.
Yeah.
And to trust that something much larger than us is happening.
Yeah. And I mean, you've connected so many dots that I'm aware of right now, just in the last few minutes, what you've been talking about. I mean, you're saying the same thing the Germans are saying, you know, and you're saying thing, it's just happening. So I think if we put this all together and we have this kind of new collaborative spirit, and that's one of the takeaways that I keep talking about from these interviews and these conversations, is that collaboration is a new competitive edge. You know,
yeah.
I mean, there's probably at some developmental level, just, you know, straight out competition. I want to kick his ass is fine. But at a certain level, you know, it's like playing in a band. You know, you want to play up to the level of the people that are playing with you, and you make each other better by playing music together and working like that. So that's we've known that for a long time, but I think it's really, really valuable, meaning what you guys are doing and what you're saying. I think it's
yeah. And
it's
for these communities out there who want to understand or have specific tools for deeper collaboration and unlocking of that shared purpose, and we're going to put together that shared resource and share with people. So they should also reach out. We want to make it open source and have different people add in, you know, their experiences and what's worked and what hasn't worked for them. So we have a library of exercises and ways to engage for people ultimately.
Yeah, and for those who are listening to this, you're kind of going, oh, it sounds kind of scary. And but when you start talking about the community, it's probably the work you really need to do. Because like I said, I was in a cult, then I was in the military for years, then I did all these things, and I got to the point, I don't want to be in community. I want to be on my own, do my own thing. I don't want to live with people, meet with people. And it's, as I've matured and grown, it's really become my cutting edge. You know, Jung said the rejected element is where you really need to go to grow. And I know this is a really important thing for me to be involved in.
I mean, we need that reflection. We need that reflection. And every time, I love what one of my teachers teaches me. He says, be in a mindset where you cannot wait to feel resentment or rejection or sadness or anger, because therein lies the work and the place where you can love yourself more. So be excited to be triggered, be excited to be resentful. And oftentimes when someone is feeling resentful or triggered, it's because they're not being asked what they want, right? So just ask, or ask yourself, what is it that I actually want? Right? And there's so many, there's so much gold in this. And I think for communities, when someone is feeling not resonant with that community, it doesn't mean not community, it just means maybe not this, because we're always in community. If 2 people, 3 people were in community, it's unavoidable. And Homo sapiens beat out the Neanderthals because of their ability to work together. It's built into our DNA, right? Because we're social creatures. So it's really, then what is the context of community for you? Where are you? And maybe you need a shift because your own journey is shifting right now. Maybe before it was much more about the spiritual, and so you had a spiritual community. Maybe before it was much more, maybe now you're shifting to one of, I want to take my spiritual practice and really be out there building. So I want a community of inner work, but really focus on outer work as well and supporting each other. Or maybe you're in a place where I just want a community of outer work, but I think it's finding the balance. And I think being one or the other too much is dangerous. So I think it's really about how do we find a community that fits you, that where you feel resonant and where you feel like meets you with what you need.
Yeah,
and again,
your current developmental needs, absolutely.
Current developmental needs, and again, the principles. What are the principles of this community? What is the context of this community?
Brilliant. Hey man, we're just about to the hour. I want to say I keep saying this every time I have one of these conversations, but this is like one of the best. Really, 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 it's very rich, Mina. Thank you. And I just want to, I'll contact Mikey and say thank you for him recommending you to be part of this, because it's very useful. And I really want to cut it down, like you said, and with the magazine you recommended, and get some of these things out.
And I can connect you to them if you want.
So thank you, everybody. We're going to wrap this up now. And Mina Lee, thank you. What a brilliant share and conversation. And we just really want to thank you, and just hope that we can collaborate in the future and ride this wave that seems to be emerging on the planet right now. Very exciting time to be in this and be alive. So here we
Yeah.
are. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you for the great questions.